Okay, we'll get this meeting started. Welcome to the 5:45 adjourned meeting. And we're going to obviously roll call. Everybody's here, I think. Everybody here?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure. And so we'll have our workshop. And today we're going to have a workshop on the Federal Legislative Advocate. And that'll be presented by David Turch and Associates. So who wants to lead off? Just Mr. David Turch.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, and citizens of my favorite city. Actually, I really look forward to being here with you. I wish I was here a little bit more often, but you'll only allow me to speak once a year, and I'm sure by the end of the evening, that'll be a good reason why that happens. I want to thank the city manager for my lapel pin. I can tell you that the flight attendant hanging my jacket today mentioned what a nice pin it was, so I gave it to her. But then I've stolen another one, so thank you very much. Because as you know, I never take it off my lapel. It just stays there. Usually I'm here to talk to you really about what we see as pretty definitive things that are happening in Washington. And I think I'm here tonight to tell you that I don't really have a very good idea. We're in a new era. We don't know how this is going to play out, so let me give you a couple of observations that I think are definitive about what happens and how it relates to you as this community and how you might interact with the federal government. First of all, as someone who has observed the political process for some time, we have to be genuinely amazed and excited that we are witnessing a political phenomenon that has been decades since we've seen anything like this. Maybe Roosevelt back in the 30s after we recovered from the Depression. But we really haven't seen the kind of a rock star politician who commands crowds beyond anything you can imagine. I mean, we have people who follow him from rally to rally. Can you think of another political person in America who's had that kind of a following? So it's pretty amazing just to watch. I would say there are two defining attributes to this president. And the first is that he does exactly what he says he's going to do. So the people who say, well, he doesn't mean that, that's quite contrary to the facts. He follows through. When he makes a declaration, he tends to follow through on it to the best of his ability, which I'm going to get into that, will be less constrained now than it has been in the past. But the second thing I think you want to grasp about this president is the things that he says he's going to do does not appear to follow a very carefully defined ideological goal. So we're never quite certain where this is going to take us because the end is a little fuzzy, and it tends to be more transactional than it is ideological, and that matters. I'm going to come back to this at the end, but it is my prediction. So often we resist change, and change is just this bad thing, and all kinds of terrible things will happen. Sometimes that's exactly what does happen, and change can be a very terrible thing. But it doesn't have to be just because it's different. But I do believe firmly, looking at where we are with all three branches of the government, that the America in which you live tonight is going to be a markedly different America than the one in which you will live in 2 years. And I think the primary reason for that is that we are erasing the constraints. We're erasing really the firewalls that we've had in the past. So let me talk about that a little bit. The president is coming in, and the qualification across the board appears to be loyalty. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. You all know as political people, loyalty matters to you. and how you get things accomplished. But it seems to be the overriding consideration here for employment, and we start at the White House. Susan Wiles is a wonderful woman. She's bright, she's smart, she is very capable, and will put order into the White House. She's not a General Kelly, and there's not going to be feedback. When the president says, this is the direction I'm going, at best, Susan might say, I'd think about it. But otherwise than that, that firewall is kind of gone away. The White House, I think, will be run well. I think it'll be efficient, but there's not going to be a stopgap there to say it's a bad idea. Now we're talking about cabinet appointments, because that's kind of the next firewall, if you will, from Mr. President, this is a bad idea. Well, what we're going to have here is pretty much with a majority in the Senate, relatively quickly approved. You notice I like that much better than rubber stamped. You just have to look for my weasel words. But quickly approved cabinet positions. And again, one of the primary definitions for a position really is loyalty to the president. Now, cabinet positions should be loyal to the president. It's not necessarily a disadvantage. Sometimes it can interfere with qualifications. We're looking at the same thing with the civil service. We're talking now, there have always been a few thousand people that have to be approved by the Senate, and they're Schedule C people, and they are political people who run the departments and the agencies and carry out the president's wishes. And then we have the professional civil servants who are by design and prohibited from participating in politics. There's the Hatch Act. They can't do it. Well, those people under the plan are now to become political appointees, which will make the government much more efficient in terms of the direction that can be coming down from the top. But we may lose, as we will or have when we've moved agencies away from Washington. Remember, we did that in the first administration. We moved a couple of agencies. They go to Alabama, or they go to Mississippi, or they go to Colorado, or wherever. 85% of the people who were employed in those agencies as professional staff people did not make the move. So in the end, you have an agency located, I want to be careful now, but let's say somewhere in Nebraska or wherever. The answer is, you've really eviscerated the agency, because the people who have the knowledge and the memory of all the mistakes we made that we don't want to make again aren't there anymore. We talk about the military. There is a committee that's been appointed who is examining our general officers to make sure that they're sufficiently loyal to the president. We have historically appointed the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the heads of each of the services for 4-year terms, and they've been pretty non-political. But remember, the president is the commander-in-chief and is free to do that. We don't know. Well, let's just say people across the river from me in the Pentagon are quite concerned that that might happen. It's different from where we've been in the past. That's just the executive branch. If we move on to the legislative branch, it's a little bit more interesting, because you think of the debates in the Congress so often as good and evil, or I'm for the program, or I'm against the program, or I don't like this, or I need this amended. You know, a lot of the debates in Congress are just about turf. This is my committee, and you're stepping across the aisle, and you're interfering with my prerogative in my committee, and I'm not giving up the turf. What does that mean for cabinet appointments? Advise and consent, a constitutional responsibility of the Senate, and the president has indicated that he would like the Senate to abrogate that responsibility, take a 10-day recess so he can make independent appointments. They're recess appointments, perfectly legal, provided the Senate isn't in session, or the Congress is not in session for 10 days. and basically bypass the advice and consent responsibility of the Senate. I think what you're going to find, even though the Mitt Romneys are not there anymore, you're going to have an institutional pushback to that whole business. So we're going to acquiesce to the most of the cabinet positions, but I think they're still going to be looked at. They're still going to go through the committee process. In the end, my guess is the Senate is not going to give up the advice and consent role. And I just say that because I've watched this for all of my time in Washington. Turf probably matters more than the efficacy of the program. When you start to step in what I think is my prerogative, we get into trouble. The same thing I think happens with tax when we get into the House of Representatives. Remember, the constitutional responsibility for taxation resides in the U.S. House. That's administered there by the Ways and Means Committee. People on Ways and Means are concerned about the national debt. So if we're going to have relatively carte blanche to just renew the 17 Tax Act, there's some pushback. Then what happens to the revenue stream, which then, remember, why are some of those provisions coming up now in 25 for renewal when it was a 10-year act? Because we have a requirement for think of it as pay as you go. You can't run a deficit more than a decade. And with we cut taxes for just about everybody, including corporations. But corporations are a little bit more dicey if you're going to renew that. So what we did is we said, for individuals, for all of you and all of you citizens of this community, your taxes went down because we know in 7 years, we're probably not going to raise your taxes. So it's a safe bet on the 10-year provision to have them paid for. And that's going to be part of the fight. So now we're talking about the deficit coming up next year with Ways and Means. Nonetheless, there is a majority in the Senate and now a majority, albeit slim, in the House. Well, provided he doesn't keep appointing people from the House to the, and I do understand Speaker Johnson has objected to that. He said, you can't keep taking people from the House and putting them in the cabinet because pretty soon I'm not going to have a majority. Makes sense. And know that that happens not because you can take, and I'm saying, I know all of you know this, but for the people back at home, remember the provision in the U.S. House of Representatives is House members must always be popularly elected. Governors can never appoint a House member, popularly elected. Now, governors can appoint an interim senator, as you just witnessed here in California. They can until the next general election, and that's not true in every state. I was challenged on that a little bit earlier tonight, and I said, look at the state immediately to your north. The governor in Oregon may not appoint an interim senator. All senators from Oregon must be popularly elected. So it varies by state. Many governors, if not most, can make that interim appointment, not all. Let me say one of the things that happened, and it would have happened whether it was Adam Schiff or Steve Garvey, you will have a more senior senator coming in, although he is the junior senator from California. You see, if you'll recall, you voted for the Senate twice. And the reason for that is there was an interim appointment. That the rule is the governor can appoint only until the next general election. So the time between November the 5th and noon on January 3rd actually the Secretary of State, the time between when the Secretary of State certifies the election, Adam Schiff will then take the oath of office immediately. What does that mean for you? You have a senator that has more seniority than any other senator who was elected for the full term this time around. And he got elected for a full term as well. God, I love to be in Washington. It is such a wonderful place where all these little machinations happen all the time. In any event, that's kind of what I wanted to share with you tonight. I think we are going to witness change. We are witnessing an an amazing political phenomenon. And whether you like them or not, we can really take some great lessons on just how to achieve political notoriety. I mean, but in accordance with that and without the stopgaps, without the firewalls, that in any meaningful manner are not there tonight, we are very likely to be living in a very different America 2 years from now than we are this evening. Now, as I've said so often to you, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have, and hearing none, I want to turn it over to Mr. Jones, who's going to tell you all the money he's going to get from you for earmarks next year. Can you elucidate? You have 42 minutes, that's it.
42, thank you. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. I appreciate your time and being in Montclair. I also have a pin, which I did not give to the flight attendant. I said, no, you may not have it. It's my favorite pin. So that's one up on David. But on the appropriate, there are a couple things with your patience I'd like to discuss with you tonight. Well, it's the current appropriations process, the FY25 process, the upcoming FY26 process, and that round starts in earnest next year, and the reauthorization of the surface transportation bill, that will take place in 2026. So those are things that we want to keep an eye on. They matter to the city and for some of the transportation priorities that you have, and you have some big ones. So on the FY25 appropriations process, that system began sort of in earnest a little late, where Congress completed the FY24 in March of this year. They were almost 6 months behind schedule. It looks like that may happen again in this current cycle, where Congress may not be able to complete the FY25 appropriations process by the end of the year. So we submitted some projects to the House and Senate, to your congressional delegation, and Representative Torres has come through again, your champion. She has been fabulous and really has gone to bat for the community of Montclair. She secured, she requested $3.6 million for your Montclair Trans Center improvements, and was able, secured $2 million for the project, and that is in the what we call THUD bill, the Transportation HUD Appropriations Bill for FY25. And that was marked up by the House, and that provision, along with other earmarks, are in that bill. That, along with the other 11 appropriation bills that fund the federal government, have not been completed, have not been enacted into law. Congress, in September of this year, did a stopgap spending bill, what we call a continuing resolution, funding the federal government from October 1st, September 30th through December 20th of this year. Speaker Johnson wanted to enact a 6-month spending bill, kicking the can down to March. And the reason why he wanted to do that, and this is, he made a public statement back in September saying because he was convinced that Republicans would have a trifecta. They would control the House, the Senate, and the White House. That's what he wanted to do. He did not have the votes to do that. There was reluctance on the part of all the Democrats, including some Republicans, that was 6-month continuing resolution was too long and it would have a negative impact on the Pentagon. So we're into a situation where Congress is going to have to make a decision to either try and complete the FY25 appropriations process by December 20th, or pass another continuing resolution to March. And the reason why that affects the city of Montclair is because we have $2 million at stake. And ideally, it would be nice to be able to have that, to know that, to work with the Department of Transportation to secure those funds early in January or soon after December 20th, as opposed to having to wait until March. But, you know, the reality is the funding's there. The good news on the, what we call earmarks, but members of Congress do not call them earmarks. That's no longer used for a number of reasons. Part of the reform of the earmark process was to call them, they call earmarks community project funding on the House side. And because the Senate doesn't like to do anything that the House does, they call them congressionally designated spending. But the reality is, for the rest of us, they're earmarks. And so, you know, the House has just made a decision, the House Republicans, who will be in control once again in the next Congress, that they are going to keep the, there was an effort to try and remove the earmark process for the next Congress. And that failed. And so we are, once again, in the next Congress, going to have earmarks. So I'll be working with your staff and you to come up with priorities. I mean, we have the priorities. You folks have been very, very consistent with the projects that you want to advance. You certainly, you know, we have the Trans Center, and then you have the Central Avenue Bridge. Those are big ticket items. Then there's some other smaller projects that we also advance. So the bottom line is that, you know, things, you know, the good news is that that we are pretty assured that Congress will do the earmarks. 70% of Republicans in the House support earmarks, so that's why they're doing it again. And then the Senate, we'll have to see what their decision is, but the likelihood, we hope, will be to continue the earmark process as well. That would give you know, your congressional, you know, senators, Padilla and Schiff, the opportunity to go to bat for you as well. So that is the FY25 process. For the FY26, we're going to be moving aggressively. I'll be talking to your staff through the next 2 months, two and a half, 3 months. We expect, if Congress does punt the ball on their appropriations process and kick the can down to March, that will push back our deadlines to submit our projects and priorities to your Congresswoman and to your 2 senators. So normally that would be done in January or sometime in February. That might be, if Congress is still trying to complete the process for the FY25 budget, then, you know, that will delay the FY26 process. So we might have a little more time to see how that plays out, but that's sort of the timeline that we're playing with. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about, and this is a little bit over the horizon, is the reauthorization of the Surface Transportation Bill. So we will have, in 2026, we will have 2 bites at the apple. Usually you only have 1, which is the appropriations process. Congress will also draft and hopefully pass a 5-year transportation reauthorization bill. And when they do that, they will, all the signs indicate that they will earmark that bill. They will ask communities to submit projects, transportation projects, and we are working with your staff to do that. I think you can get a significant amount of money. The dollar numbers go up. You know, and appropriations, you have sort of limited, they're capped. They're also capped on the reauthorization, but the dollar numbers are much higher. So you can get larger funding levels, and we can also pursue the appropriations process and the reauthorization. But we want to make sure we've got our projects in queue, that we've taken certain steps, planning, design, and engineering, if that's required, so that we can ask for construction funds or to acquire property or whatever it may be, you know, that we need to do. So, and finally, if I may, I just wanted to put this out there for your consideration, that hopefully you will consider coming to Washington at some point. We just don't know how, with the new administration coming in and the President-elect Donald Trump's interest in reforming the federal government and its impact on the career civil servants. We'll have to see how that plays out. 2 weeks before he left office in 2020, he signed an executive order that put 50,000 federal employees on what he called Scheduled F, which is at will, right? So you have career service protected, and then moved, these are mid-level, David mentioned this, mid-level to senior level staffers through all the agencies and departments, and putting them on this schedule, and then they're at will and can be either terminated or whatever. That will have some impact, clearly, on the people that we work with at these various agencies. If should that happen, we don't know that for certain, but the reality is the president has talked about this repeatedly. President-elect has talked about this repeatedly, so we certainly expect him to follow through on this. This will be tied up in litigation, but it will have a real impact on each of these agencies and departments. And so we'll have to sort of see how that plays out and see, David mentioned some of these agencies may be moved to other parts of the country. That could happen, but that may not happen. It's not going to happen in the first year, or is unlikely to happen in the first year, but you never know. Congress certainly has to fund that. So I put this out. I mean, I will coordinate with your staff and then with you folks, and I would encourage you, if there's an interest, to consider going to Washington. I think it's valuable. We meet with different agencies and departments that are specific to your priorities, as well as, I don't want to call it a fishing expedition, but to see, hey, here are some other agencies and programs that are available to you that you may have an interest in. So I'm more than happy to answer any questions. Obviously, I would prefer that David answer them, but but otherwise, I'm more than happy. Man, easy ones for me, hard ones for David.
Oh, great. Any questions from council members, comments from council members this time? Bill?
Just a few observations. David, I think I've known you close to 30 years, 1994, I believe. And in that time, and I know Jamie, I've known you about that long too, we've seen a lot of changes in Washington, the ups, the downs, the in and out. And recently, and I remembered it tonight, recently I attended the retirement for our good friend Grace Napolitano, longtime Congress member on transportation, did a great job. The keynote at that retirement, now for the public, Congressman Napolitano was a Democrat. The person who gave the keynote at the retirement was Congressmember David Dreyer, another longtime friend of ours. He's a Republican.
Yes.
He gave great words about Grace and she about him. But the one thing he said, and I really wish we'd get back to this, he said, quote, Gracie and I had a deal. If we disagreed on 20% of the things, we moved ahead with the 80% and tried to negotiate on the others. That's statesmanship, that's leadership. It wasn't a case of what was good for them or their party. It was what was good for the district, the region, the state of California, and the United States. I liked that. I also remembered tonight, and this goes way back in history, very few of us in this room were here. It was, I believe, August of '64 when a U.S. Senator from California, Claire Ingle, died. Then Edmund G. Brown, the governor, appointed Pierre Salinger. Pierre Salinger, a Democrat, and he was appointed to fill the remaining term. That November, there was an election. George Murphy, Republican, ran against Pierre Salinger. George Murphy lost. George Murphy won, Salinger lost. Just before the Senate was due to be sworn in, 3 days before, in fact, Pierre Salinger resigned his seat, giving Edmund G. Brown the opportunity to appoint a senator for 2 days. He appointed somebody from the other party. He appointed George Murphy. Salinger did this because he wanted to make sure that his state had a little more seniority in the incoming freshman class of senators. I wish we'd see that. I don't think we will again. And then going way, way back in history, and we can read this. Abraham Lincoln decided to have a cabinet not personally loyal to him, people he believed were loyal to the country. He appointed a team that was, as Doris Kearns Goodwin wrote, a team of rivals. They argued, they didn't all agree. In fact, I understand their cabinet meetings were pretty bad, but they helped save the Union. And he wanted people who were smarter than he was. So that would be a high bar with Abraham Lincoln. So I just go back and look at the way it used to be. And I think we all remember Congressman Jerry Lewis, who represented this Inland Empire very, very well. On many occasions, I heard him, I think Mayor Dutre, you've heard him as well on this, when he said, there are only 3 kinds of congressmen: Democrats, Republicans, and Jerry was a Republican, and appropriators. He said, and I'm glad to be the latter. In other words, the party didn't matter. It was what was good for his district and the state. And I don't know if we'll see, we haven't seen much of that for years. I hope we will see it again, but I doubt it. And it doesn't bode well for us when we have people who cannot function, who are out to get everybody. I mean, I've heard stories about various speakers on both sides of the aisle doing just what Speaker Johnson did. It's not appropriate, but we'll see what happens. We have to keep the faith and do the best we can, and I'm appreciative of the people who are there who work for this city and the region, are different members of Congress, and they do work together, and I know Congressmember Torres works with her colleagues across the aisle. She also works with those in the region, Pete Aguilar and Judy Chu. I know she'll work with incoming Congressman Gil Cisneros. She's worked with Young Kim from down in Yorba Linda, although she's lost some of that district. And I just hope we'll continue, at least on that small scale, doing something. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. Councilman, I want to thank you so much for your friendship over 3 decades. I will say I was a little disconcerted because you talked about people that I knew. We talked about Napolitano, and we talked about David Dreyer, a good friend. We talked about Senators Murphy, Claire Engel, Jerry Lewis, and then he started to talk about Abraham Lincoln. I didn't know him.
Well, I worked on his first campaign as an intern.
Thank you. Councilmember Lopez.
Gentlemen, thank you again for flying out here and coming and addressing us in your annual pilgrimage out to Montclair. I will ask around to see if indeed those lapel pins stay on your shirts in other cities. I'm teasing. Jamie, I had a question regarding the civil service issue. You mentioned that President Trump in his first term, the last 2 weeks, he did the executive order which removed the job security of, I think you said 20,000, was it?
50,000,
50,000.
up to 50,000, yeah.
My question is this, I had thought that the Biden administration enacted some policy or got the Congress to enact some policy to secure that so they would no longer be in threat of that status again. Is that accurate?
So you're absolutely right. Yeah, it's exactly what happened. President Trump, 2 weeks before he left office, issued this executive order, and President Biden, coming into the White House, rescinded it, basically, issued it.
So technically, what I was asking is, was there any more teeth to rescinding it and protecting the workers, or is it just at will now, or at the whim of whoever occupies the White House? Is that going to continue?
It's a good question. Congress did take steps to try and buttress the process. So it's not going to be a simplified process of just issuing an executive order and terminating 50,000 jobs. It's going to be more complicated.
Well, I appreciate that. And again,
Thank you
thank you
for the
for your
question.
time and thank you for making the trek out here.
Thank you for the question. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to actually thank both of you for all that you do for us. We are so fortunate to have you lobbying for us in Washington. I appreciate the fact that you keep us in the loop by sending those newsletters that you've been sending and the email updates. And we're just very fortunate to have you lobbying for us. And I also want to thank you for the time that both of you took when some of us were in Washington together, and you really did make sure that we got to see and talk to all of the legislators that we needed to, and you made sure that we did everything that we were supposed to do. So I'm very grateful. We are honored to have you, and I hope that we continue for a very long time, that you will be with us. Mr. Mayor, that concludes my comments.
Great, thank you very much. Question to add, regarding the earmarks that, as discussed, are there projects the staff's looking at for the next round of appropriations?
Yes,
Question of
there are a
appropriations.
number of projects that we submit each year for consideration. Congressman Torres sometimes wants to be more specific about the projects she wants to carry forward, but we continue to submit a list of about 4 or 5 different projects that are of particular interest to the City of Montclair. Unfortunately, under the current formula distribution that the Congress uses, states like California, particularly communities that are represented by Democratic representatives, receive less formula money. I think around 35% versus 65.
So the current split is 62-38, around, roughly that. So 38 for Democrats, 62% for Republicans, because they're in the majority.
Right.
And, yeah.
So unfortunately, based on that formula, while we submit a number of projects that may total $20 million, for example, the amount of money available for the Congresswoman to distribute to the cities that she represents is typically around $10 million. So that means that we have to bring our numbers down significantly. It's good news that we might be receiving $2 million for the Montclair Transportation Center. We've had to change the name now. It's no longer the Transit Center. It's the Trans Center. It's the Transportation Center because of some confusion over the expression Trans Center, which was interpreted by Congress as being a sexual orientation reassignment facility. So,
The Appropriations Committee had some concerns about
Right.
the misunderstanding of what exactly the project was.
right, correct. So we now call it something different when we apply for funding from Congress. But we will be submitting again this year probably requests for the Central Avenue Bridge, the Montclair Trans Center, because of the number of projects that we have in relation to the Trans Center, including acquisition of the Trans Center from Caltrans, the San Antonio Channel, Safe Routes to Schools and Complete Streets programs. And it was mentioned by Jamie that there is some interest on part of Congress for property acquisition. And as members of the City Council are aware, we do need to try and acquire some properties on Monte Vista Avenue between Benito Street and San Bernardino Street, and we probably will apply under that concept as well to try and secure some funding to acquire some properties there.
Great, and then as far as existing earmarks, what projects are we, what projects did we get awarded, or we're about to get, what projects are moving forward
You
from
have
Montclair?
so the one project that's moving forward is going
Transportation
to,
Center.
is the the Transportation Center.
Okay,
I should be
got it.
clear about that.
Okay, that's moving forward. Okay.
Has moved forward, and we're waiting. That's why I mentioned the fact that the House will be making, the Speaker will be making a decision very shortly about whether or not to complete the appropriations process this year or punt it to March of next year. So we either will know by December 20th, or we'll know sometime in March about how all this is completed. But the reality is, both in the House, both Democrats and Republicans support the earmark process. And in light of the developments in the Republican conference and their rules, the earmarks will stay. And therefore, we certainly expect that all earmarks, including the one from Montclair, will be in any final adjudication of the appropriations
Okay,
process.
thank you. Ben, did you have anything else to say?
Yeah, just a couple follow-ups. Ed, what was the amount that we were missing for the Central Avenue Bridge, the gap?
We have 15 million that we received from the state, although that is subject to reconsideration by Caltrans. The 15 million was based on replacement of the bridge. Caltrans has since made a decision that perhaps the bridge only needs to be resurfaced, and it's likely that they will reduce the $15 million down to 2 million. We estimate that we need approximately $35 million for the project. So if Caltrans decides in their infinite wisdom that we are only to receive $2 million, then we have a shortfall of $33 million. Otherwise, if we retain the 15 million, then we need to obtain approximately $20 million.
So of that, will there be a request for the 20 million going to these gentlemen for the feds?
No, we would have to pare it down. Congresswoman Torres would not accept a request for that amount simply because of the funding that she's limited to.
Limitation, right, okay.
And if I may, sir, you might, besides the appropriations process, we certainly look and share this information with staff and regarding the grant process from FHWA and DOT. Yeah.
I'm sure you have been told this, but I will express my concern or my importance of it. That bridge is of big concern to several residents that I've talked to. It is to me. I mentioned it on the dais here several meetings. I am very concerned of God forbid we have one good sizable earthquake and that thing gets compromised. I wish Caltrans would have categorized it with a higher priority so we could have gotten this thing done. But please do stress that point and try to secure us whatever you can for that. And thank you in advance. And then related, again, to the city manager's comment, I refreshed my memory. You mentioned the need to acquire properties on Monte Vista between Benito and San Bernardino. What was the need of the project for that again?
To widen that particular bottleneck with the Monte Vista Avenue grade separation, the volume of traffic north-southbound on Monte Vista Avenue is increased over recent years, and we need to make a number of modifications, including some traffic signal improvements. But minimally, I think we need to acquire the 4 properties at the northeast side of Monte Vista Avenue so that we can at least create left and right turn pockets at that particular point between Monte Vista Avenue and San Bernardino. But ideally, it would be nice to acquire properties on one or the other side so that we can do widening and create multiple lanes north-south in that direction and eliminate that bottleneck.
Thank you for the explanation.
Okay, Councilman Rue?
Yes, I was just thinking when you talk about the appropriations process, projects that need to be done, not just here in Montclair, across our nation. I've read in some of the, I'm going to say more responsible publications, Bloomberg, Forbes, many others, that, and if I'm to believe what I read, the incoming administration wants to, quote unquote, decamp from Washington, move everything back to the states and local governments. For those cities that cry local control, be aware of what you wish for. You just might get it. I go back not too long ago to the administration of Jerry Brown, where he had his policy of subsidiarity. Subsidiarity is the term for pushing everything down to lowest common place. So a lot of programs in the state were pushed down to locals. At the time, the cities didn't like it, even though they were getting their local control. I would just say the watchword is to see where these programs are going to go, because in many cases, it's going to the local governments that will have to come up with the money, and the federal government will not be funding it. If I'm to just know what I believe in reading, as I said, Bloomberg, Forbes, read some of those entities, and we'll see. I hope that that doesn't happen because many local governments can't afford it. But if you say you want local control, you just may get it. Thanks.
Well, thank you. I'll make some closing remarks. Obviously, this was an interesting presidential election, or turnout actually, because turnout in this election was down compared to 20. I think right now for the federal, looks like it's 5 million less compared to 20. So obviously, there's some still counting taking place. California is probably 2 million less. County San Bernardino is probably closer to 100,000 less, and in this city, it's probably 2,000 less compared to 20. I find it interesting, too, is you look at President-elect Trump, where he is now in California, the number of votes he has, and where he is now in San Bernardino County, he's going to get about the same amount of votes that he did in 20 in California and San Bernardino County. Only difference in San Bernardino County, this morning, he was still in the lead, got the same amount of votes, even though I think 20 years ago, in 20 election, Biden got a lot more votes in the county of San Bernardino. So obviously the turnout is less, and I really believe the big issue in this election, obviously there's a lot of issues in this election, depends what group you talk to, but I think the main core group, the swing votes, the votes that really count here in the middle, we talk about it, was the cost of living. I think a lot of people were upset what they were paying for in the grocery stores and gas and other things, the cost of living. And that either turned people off and said, my vote in 20 didn't count. Look at where I am 4 years later. Worse now, I'm 4 years later, and I might just stay home. Or other voters probably did a swing vote. And you know, the new administration coming in, they have a choice. Either they can do stuff that's in the benefit of the entire nation, or do stuff that I consider to be benefiting a smaller group of their supporters. I believe in 2 years that Dave Church, you're right. This might be a different nation. It'll be interesting to see how the American people react to is if indeed this is the nation they want in 2 years. And unfortunately, if things are not that good in 2 years, what's the long-term damage of this country is going to be, nation? So it's going to be a roller coaster. That's the way I look at it. You talk about the staffing levels in the federal government. I just suspect there's a lot of federal employees that really care about their job, care about doing the right mission, try to stay away from the partisan politics, and I suspect a lot of them are going to say, it's time to leave. Either I'm going to retire or go into the private sector or go into a non-federal government position. So it's kind of scary where things are headed for. I realize people want reform, but I think, again, the voters really want it was just, hey, do something about the cost of living. And there's some policies being considered, the tariffs, the immigration, or the illegal alien returning back to their foreign countries could have damaging costs when it comes to inflation, higher inflation. And so, but we're here, and this is what the American people wanted. Either if you decided to turn out and vote, or you decided to stay home and not vote, this is what the American people wanted. So with that, we are now adjourned.